All right, I think we're going to get started. So this is the 4 C's to address before your low T. So for you gentlemen on this, thanks for tuning in wherever you are, however you're listening. If there's any ladies tuning in, what I want to do is caution you with this information that you don't use it to try to manipulate your husband or boyfriend or the males in your life. That you don't go to them and be like, hey, you should do this because so-and-so did it. So let the men discover these things for themselves, and they'll have a whole lot more weight in their implementation. So that's a little bit of cue to the ladies out there. Now, I am Dr. Kurt Perkins. So more importantly, I'm a husband. This year celebrating 10 years with my wife in holy matrimony. We have 3 little boys, 6, 4, and 2. All birthdays coming up here in the fall, October, November, December. I'm a leader, follower, reader, listener, friend, enemy, author. This is a thing I've never set out to actually try to achieve, but I did write a book back in 2016 called Steward Leadership. And I think a lot of today's webinar has to do with what was birthed out of that book. And the whole premise is to basically, if you want to be a better effective leader, if you want to have a more successful business, if you want to be better at parenting, whatever your role is in life, you have to take care of yourself first. And it stemmed from just, I was going to write a blog post on my website, and it kept getting longer and longer and longer until the point I'm like, this is basically way too long for a digital format. And so I thought about more and more, and I don't know, turned out 170 pages worth of material. But I would say the 2 biggest influences on this book were my dad and brother. And both were amazing, amazing men, servants of everyone to the point of the detriment. And so that's the whole point of that book, is to give you permission to step back, allow yourself to take some time. Because if you don't have that rest, if you don't find that rest, it's going to find you. And reality of the situation is that this picture was taken a month ago, June 22nd. The gravestone is my brother, who passed away at age 37. We're coming up on 9 years coming this August. And the casket about to go into the ground, that's my dad. And he had a 7 to 8 year battle with Alzheimer's, with the past 2 years pretty much zero quality of life. And especially the past, the last month or 2 was 24-hour care and it was sad. And I would say I probably had more of my emotional goodbyes in reality of the situation a couple of years ago, but it's still surreal to see your dad and brother buried next to each other. And that leaves me the oldest male in the family, immediate family, at 39 years old. So kind of use some of my experiences and some of my pain to maybe open your eyes to a little bit of what you can do to better experience life. I'm a stand-up desker in functional medicine. I think this is probably the biggest component of my practice, in that what is functional medicine? I guess that's the bigger thing. And what it is just a series or a system of delivery of healthcare. And I think what it looks at more is it values systems over symptoms. Traditional medicine wants to kind of categorize your symptoms and give you something for that. So you have pain, we have a painkiller. You have depression, we have an antidepressant. You have high cholesterol, we have a cholesterol lowering drug. The problem with those things is they may help short term, but long-term benefit has proven nothing. And so that leaves us with a nation of 86% chronic illness rate. And we're trying to apply emergency interventions to chronic illness, and it's never going to work. And it hasn't worked, it's never going to. So there's where functional medicine is going to fill that gap, especially with chronic illness, where we're looking at systems and origins over symptoms and organs. So if we're looking at today specifically, you'll see symptoms with guys that are depressed. They may have some poor energy, some weight fluctuations, whether they gain weight or they're wasting weight. I've even seen that standpoint. And then the sex drive. But if you looked at symptoms just alone without any context around them, you could label these 4 symptoms virtually any illness out there. This could be the flu. We're not happy when we have the flu. Our energy's down. We may lose some weight. And we're definitely not worried about making babies if we're throwing up and diarrhea and those types of things. This could be thyroid issues. This could be cancer. This could be heart disease. So that's the whole point of looking at systems opposed to symptoms, is that you line 10 people up with the same symptoms and all 10 of them have something different. With the systems as well, you could line all 10 people up with low T and all 10 got there a different way. So I think the basic premise and the biggest thing I hope is the takeaway today is that symptoms are not stupid. It's your body's intelligent adaptation to buy you time to escape what's potentially harming you. And so what that really means is the first C we're going to talk about is everything has to come down to a context. And so this is what I go through with all my clients, is that regardless of what condition they're coming in for help, what symptoms they have, the body is all about context. And so everything's going to start with the brain. And in the complexity and infinite things we don't know about the brain, what we do know is its basic role is to organize life. And we have two kind of closets that we organize into. One is the protective side, or what I'll tell people that, hey, this is the gas pedal, you're flooring it. Or we have this growth and recovery side, and this is the brake pedal. And where health resides is not being on one side versus the other for long, but the ability to straddle back and forth, react and recover, react and recover. Where illness starts to develop, or where I see it anyway, like people coming into my clinic, is that they've been shifted over this way too much and way too long. And so they end up having this default protective mechanism. And so when we look at some of the physiological effects that are associated with this being on this side of life, you may like relate to like, okay, I have that, I have that, I have that, I have that. But the brain, the first thing it's going to talk to in that protective side are your adrenal glands. And most people think stress with adrenals. And I would say, no, like think survival. Stress is necessary. Growth is necessary. Like stress plus growth, or stress plus rest equals growth. So we need stress in our life, but we have to combine that with rest to create growth. The problem is when someone's on this side for too long, it's going to set up a series of a bunch of events. So in this case, or in any case, the adrenals get hit and it's going to release one class of signals called the catecholamines. So this is going to be another C that we're going to talk about today, the CATs for short. You've experienced these things. So epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine, or think adrenaline, and that's going to increase blood pressure, that's going to increase heart rate, your cholesterol is going to go up. Another C that we're going to talk about, your blood vessels will constrict, your chance of clotting will increase, and then your muscles will get tight. Tight and short and ready to pounce as you need. If you took this list of symptoms to your doctor, basically they would label you with, you have some sort of heart disease. You're in immediate heart attack. We have to put you on a bunch of different medications. The problem with that is if we don't have the context around it, being on medications may harm you more than help you. Maybe they see just the symptoms, but you're like, hey, you have these wild animals running around in your parking lot. And if I come in after escaping that, all these things are going to be up. Or you just, I don't know, you just rode 1,000 meters as fast as you could. All these things are going to be up and your doc just wants to treat symptoms. Now, if this was like a real world event, or I guess a hypothetical, hopefully it's not too real, but say you're out hiking and a bear pops out, all these things happen to help you escape, but you're the person with a drug to lower your blood pressure. You're the person with a drug to lower your cholesterol. And you're the person, that's on a drug to thin the blood. Your chance of survival is going to be much lower than anyone else that can have full function with that. So the short-term benefit of a medication may make you feel good as the bear gnaws your leg off type of thing. So that's one instance that we're going to talk about, catecholamines. The other thing with these guys is that they're going to cycle back up to a part of the brain. Think of the A called the amygdala. No, don't worry about that part. But think of reaction anxiety. So you'll see similar physiological changes and alterations with people that have heart disease and that have anxiety. It's just expressed in two different kind of locations in the body and felt in two different locations. So that's where when we start chasing symptoms, oftentimes it's not successful because how we express this potential stressor, and it could be physical, chemical, emotional, social, you name it, how we express that is going to be unique for the individual. Like I said before, if I could line up 10 people with low T, all 10 kind of got there different ways. So just by giving someone T doesn't mean they're going to have that great reaction. Now, this part of the brain is kind of on alert in there. You have to realize you can't be in protection and growth at the same time. So if your body's favoring survival for the next 30 seconds, it's going to be at the expense of your 30-year legacy. So with this kind of specific, when we have the amygdala always being alerted, then when we go on the growth side, the hippocampus, if you think the word campus, and that's where we're going to learn, concentrate, and memorize things, that's going to go down. So I have a ton of guys come in brain fog, focus, mental clarity, can't find the words I'm looking for, you name it. And it's not because they're diseased, it's because they have physiologically shifted to one side versus the other. So that's kind of all within microseconds. Now, another C we're going to talk about today is cortisol. Again, most people say, hey, this is the stress hormone. I was like, nope, not a stress hormone. This is a survival hormone. To ask somebody who has basically totally depleted this reaction if they wish they had this. So that's something to keep in mind, is like the body never does stupid stuff. Everything is appropriate, but everything is dose dependent. So too much of this, not a good thing. Too little of this, not a good thing. When it's well regulated, life's fantastic. But if we look at kind of the role and the function of cortisol, one of its big functions is to increase blood sugar. And that's intelligent. Again, nothing is ever stupid in the body. That's intelligent to give you instant fuel, to give you basically the rocket fuel to run away as fast as you can. So if you look, again, go to your traditional doctor with these symptoms. You have blood pressure's up, heart rate's up, cholesterol's up, blood vessels constricting, muscles getting tight, blood sugar's up. You can't concentrate. You're coming out with probably 4 or 5 medications already. Again, look at the context. What am I going through personally in life? What have I been exposed to in the past? What have I experienced in the past? All those things are going to be clues. Your history is going to be a giant clue into how you're expressing health today, how you eat, how you move, how you think. Now, here's where we start disrupting more of the body, is that if blood sugar is going high, we have checks and balances. Like the body's not stupid. It's going to release insulin as a response to too high of a blood sugar. Because if blood sugar is too high, then what happens? We go into a diabetic coma. We can't control that. So the brain basically tells that side of the body, the pancreas, release some insulin. Our blood sugar is too high, but we have this internal battle and this internal debate of, do I need this resource, carbs and sugar, in the immediate? Do I have danger I have to escape from? If the answer is yes, then I'm going to keep it in the system and, the fancy terms, downregulate, basically ignore the other functions that will help store it for later. So what happens with insulin is we start to become insulin resistant. And most people will think insulin resistant as diabetes and weight gain. But I would caution you, the first place to become insulin resistant is actually going to be in the liver. This is huge because I just read an article this morning. Now, liver cancer is like one of the fastest growing cancers out there. Insulin is a growth hormone. It makes cells grow and divide quicker than it needs to. So if insulin is constantly bombarding the liver, it's going to, even if you never had a drop of alcohol, your liver is going to look like you've been, a drunk your whole life. Now, we're going to come back to this because this is going to be another important point in kind of the disruption of this whole system. So right now we're kind of talking about the neuroendocrine aspect of initial stress response. So that's kind of one system I like to analyze when I'm working with people. Now, adrenals will also release another hormone called DHEA. The importance of this is that it is basically the building block or one of the precursor building blocks to testosterone. And I would also add cholesterol is the building block of DHEA. Cholesterol is the building block of cortisol. So cholesterol to DHEA to testosterone, no problem. The problem, though, is where are we at in life physiologically? Are we in protection? Are we in growth? We're always going to err on the side of caution. We're not going to take our chances. We're not going to wait around to see if the bear's lost its teeth or he's full or he's still sleepy from hibernation. So we have this stress, and in order to escape, we got these things to get us running. Now, when we're, I don't know, like another part of the stress response kind of here, this protection response, is that when cortisol and DHEA combine, they're going to start changing how our gut and GI system functions. We can look at the gut and GI system as kind of opposing effects as well. One side is going to be more immune system related. The other is going to be more digestion. But if we're looking at the immune response, you may have experienced this in life at some point. So let's go back to our bear example. Let's say you're running from the bear and your only escape is this nasty swamp. You dive head first, and without thinking of it, until you're in the water, then you look up and there's dirty diapers floating around and there's toxic waste and there's parasites and you name it. The cool thing is, because of this immediate protection, the cortisol, the DHA tell your gut, I need you to lock down. And don't think gut just as your belly, but this tube from your mouth out the other end. When that locks down, now you potentially quarantine what you inhale or ingest that could be harmful. When you get to safety, that's when you may throw up and diarrhea and those types of things. Or what I see oftentimes is that people push hard. They know they have a vacation coming up. They put in longer hours. They push harder, maybe a little less sleep, a little less nutrition. They don't want to buy groceries before going on vacation, so they're just kind of eating what's left in the house, all these types of things. And then they get to vacation, they start to relax, and day 2, day 3, they get sick. And it's because they were in this protective mode and they took the foot off that gas pedal, so to speak. And now what has been suppressed to keep you running is now being released. So like you'll see with athletes too, in the heat of competition, in the heat of battle, they're running, they're jumping, whatever it is, they crank an ankle. Hey, not too bad. But now the game is over, the hike is over, whatever it is. You look down and you have this muffin top over your boot. Your ankle is swollen up. So in short term, we actually become anti-inflammatory with that immune response at the expense of digestion. So the gut and GI is going to favor this side if we're in protective mode. But the problem is when we're in this protective mode, it sets the body up for tissue breakdown. How's that going to disrupt testosterone? Well, testosterone is an anabolic hormone. It wants to build you up. So the body's not going to expend energy in producing and regulating testosterone if it needs that energy to produce and regulate cortisol and DHEA and that immune response to keep you going in the next 30 seconds, even if it's the expense of your next 30 years. Now, in that state of tissue breakdown, one of the easiest targets is going to be that gut lining. It's only one layer thick. So it's an easy target to knock down, break down, to get resources of amino acids and fats to sustain whatever needs to happen to keep you in protective mode. So the problem with that is now that gut barrier doesn't stay strong. It has a potential, what was quarantined, to leak out into the bloodstream. This could be food, it could be parasites, it could be bacteria, it could be you name it. And that's where the more overt immune response, your antibodies kick into gear that have more of an expressive response with them to kind of get your attention. Now, antibodies don't work alone. What they need is inflammation. And this is where the liver kind of gets hung up, in that the antibodies talk to the liver, and then the liver says, you know what, I'm going to help. I'm going to produce some inflammatory things. And so if the liver is busy producing inflammation, then there's going to be disruption in things like hormone conversion, especially like thyroid and growth hormone and those types of things. Our detox pathways are going to go out the window. The problem too is when inflammation gets produced, I don't know, if the body likes a little, it kind of is like a party. If there's a few people, like, let's invite more people. And so that in itself, even if the external stress is gone, now has produced this perpetual pattern of dysfunction within that. Now we have to work on metabolic stuff, even if it's a mental emotional issue. And so, like I said, detox kind of goes out the window. And then the brain's communication to produce testosterone is like, well, there's no need for that. Who cares if I can make babies if I can't escape the next 30 seconds? So we have this whole internal intelligence, but can be highly disruptive if someone's in that for too long. And what happens is I get guys coming in what I call the F syndrome. They're fat, they're fatigued, and they're forgetful. Now, the fat component, just on a side note, is that this can be another reason why low T or testosterone gets disrupted. Is fat. Think of our body fat as a hormone itself. It's a communication to the nervous system, and it'll do a bunch of things. But one of the things it does is it releases this enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. So with someone on, I don't know, with the big belly, one, that's going to produce inflammation, but also you're more apt to take what testosterone you do produce and convert that to estrogen. And so it's this whole dichotomy, and like it just keeps going and going and going. Now, when we're looking at context of things, I kind of go back to my undergrad days where I was a lab rat. My kind of main role was to sequence DNA for this advisor who had grants from the NIH to do genetic sequencing. So if you have this Petri dish, we all use those in high school biology, that has the gel in it, and you have to write the nutrients and the right oxygen levels and the right temperature, and the dish has to be clean, all these things. You need a perfect environment for these cells to grow well. The problem is if a dish gets messed up, if you don't give it the right nutrients, or if you give it the wrong temperature, or if it's dirt, you name it, it basically comes down to that environment is deficient and toxic, and that's when it causes that cell to adapt. And until you can figure out and clean up that deficiency and toxicity, until you can create purity and you can create sufficiency, you're going to stay in that protective mode. The hard part is you got to do some digging. You got to do some research. You got to do some self-analysis, because there's going to be 6 main influences that are going to trigger these things. So there's going to be a nutritional component, a chemical, a physical, a mental, a medical component. And I kind of skip genetic on purpose because that's the constant in the equation. We're not going to change that. So I would say that's the least of the order of priority for any of these things. But you're going to have to address all of them. I can't tell you how many people I've had come in, like their diet is pristine, but the rest of those other things are falling apart. So if they come off their diet even a little bit, everything goes to crap. So when you build everything up to be strength, there's going to be some leeway and some forgiveness, essentially, if you're not perfect on all these lifestyle factors. So when you have a symptom, so if the cell is adapting, that cell integrity, probably the first 2 questions you should ask yourself is, what am I deficient in? What am I toxic in? Say for the physical standpoint, it could be you have a desk job, so you're not moving enough. Even if you go exercise at the gym 2 hours a day, now you're sitting 8 to 12 hours at work. You're on your back, hopefully 7 to 9 hours sleeping each night. And then you have your drive time, and then you have your meal time. And so for 23 and a half hours a day, we're probably inactive. Sometimes we're doing too much and we need to slow down. So it's add sleep in that physical component of it. Mental, maybe you don't have a social outlet. I don't know. There's all these factors in there. And that's where you have to start taking inventory of those things. And that's where traditional medicine doesn't help, because they don't have the time to go through all these things with you. Thankfully, I do. And I've designed it that way in my clinic, because that's what's going to get people better. And that's why my intake form is, it's all digital now, but if you printed it, it'd probably be 23, 25 pages long, because those things are just as important as lab data. is what you've been experienced to, what you've been exposed to, what you've chosen, all those factors. Now, cholesterol is going to be a huge key in optimizing testosterone. The main component, it's the building block. And so for the past 40 years, we've had this huge attack on cholesterol. And is it ironic that now we have all these low T centers popping up around the nation? I've got one just down the street from my office here. But I think if we start asking the right questions about cholesterol, A, we don't scare it. We're not scared of it. B, we can make way better decisions when our doctor says, hey, you should lower that type of thing. And C, I just think it's been overblown and over proportion. And so if we start looking at the roles of cholesterol, one, building block of hormones. So not just testosterone, but if there's ladies, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol that we've already talked about, another C, and vitamin D. And so again, we're seeing tons of people with vitamin D deficiency and suboptimal vitamin D levels, but they're also concerned about the cholesterol. And this is going to be this internal conflict of, I can't lower cholesterol and raise vitamin D effectively both, because they're both, vitamin D is going to be effective cholesterol. So if I'm always in the battle of lowering cholesterol, it's going to be hard to get those vitamin D levels, even if you're taking 5, 10, 15,000 units. I've had a number of patients that have come in before doing that. Like, I can't get my vitamin D levels high. Well, they're on a statin. That's going to be part of the reason. Aids in bile production, so how your body processes fats. And this is probably the single most important aspect of cholesterol's role, is that it's the layer of every single cell in your body. It's literally the super glue that holds you together. So when we start lowering and we start altering cholesterol, and I don't care if it's, I don't know, a synthetic thing like Lipitor, or it's a herbal like red yeast rice, you always have to come back. What's the role of it? And once you understand the role, you're like, well, why would I want to lower this type of thing? There's other factors that are going to have way more dictation into your level of heart disease and risk factors than your cholesterol levels. And one of those factors is going to be stress. And we've known this for 60 years. This is a study from 1958. And you'll see group B there on that top line, group A on the bottom line, and then the dotted line is kind of an average of the two. Both groups are accountants. Group B are corporate accountants. Group A are kind of your private H&R Block type accountants. And so whoever did the research took cholesterol levels every 2 weeks. And you can see the fluctuations there. Now, interesting, what happens at the end of January for corporate accountants? They've got a file for businesses, for corporations. So guess what? Their cholesterol levels shot up. The, what do you call it? The private guys in group A, that's not a big stress point for them. They're down. Now you'll see both groups, they're shooting up right before April 15th, tax day. And so you'll see cholesterol, and you could do this with blood sugar, and you could do this with blood pressure, and you could do it like for a number of physiological factors. It's going to be circumstantial and based on what's around you and kind of what you're experiencing around there, and time of day and time of year and all those types of things. So when we're looking at lab data, that's why the health history is so important, because we're trying to get context around those data points. So if you're an accountant and you go get your cholesterol done on April 14th, guess what you're probably coming out of the office with? Or if you're a, I don't know, regular H&R guy on January 22nd, they're gonna be like, you're good. So during the year, during circumstances, during emotional stress times, you're gonna have way different expressions with these things. Now, how they got to the point cholesterol was bad, or not, I wouldn't say that. That's back in the early 1900s, where they fed rats high cholesterol foods, or rabbits high cholesterol foods. The problem with that is rabbits don't eat high cholesterol foods. So of course they're gonna have poor blood lipids. Now, the lie you've been told for 40 years with kind of these lowering cholesterol is the drug companies, and that when Lipitor did its research, they put basically for every 100 people, well, we'll divide one side versus the other, but they did this study for 3.5 years. And at the end of it, for every 100 participants in the Lipitor group, 2 people had heart attacks. For every 100 participants that got a placebo, 3 people had a heart attack. So you and I would kind of look at that and be like, well, that's not really much difference. So Lipitor is 1% effective in the population. That's ridiculous. Why do they market it so heavy? Well, this is what they do to you, is they do a headline of Lipitor lowers your heart attack risk by 50%. And they mess with the numbers where they say the placebo had 3 people with heart attacks. Lipitor had 2 people with heart attacks. And they say 3 minus 2 is 1. 1 is therefore half of 2. And so we have a 50% reduction in heart attacks. So when you're looking at these headlines and kind of sensationalize things, just remember that there's a relative number, which is usually the percentage. Like there's another thing I was looking at where women over 40 double their risk of birth defects when they're pregnant. Well, yes, but when you look at the actual numbers, it went from a 0.5% chance to a 1% chance. So yes, it doubled their risk of birth defects, but it's only in reality only a 0.5% chance. They're going to be 99.5% fine, or 99% fine. So it's ridiculous in those types of things. So these are questions to ask your doctor and kind of bring up to them. And so back in 1984, we have Time saying cholesterol, and the bad news is, and then back a couple of years ago, Time's changed its mind, and now we have eat butter. Scientists labeled fat the enemy and why they were wrong. So if you're going to mess with cholesterol, realize you're probably going to have an effect on testosterone. And ask that to your doctor. If they're like, hey, we want you on this medication, just ask them, great, then what effect will it have on vitamin D? What effect will it have on testosterone? What effect will it have on these other hormones? And so that opens this conversation of risk-benefit analysis. So C number 2 is cholesterol. Number 1 is context. Number 2 is cholesterol. Number 3 is cortisol. And again, we talked about most people say, hey, this is a stress hormone. I was like, nope, it's a survival hormone. You want this. It just has an appropriate dose with it. And so kind of what appropriate doses look like depends on, I'll get to that next. Actually, let me go to that now. Kind of depends on part of the day. So in the morning, you want to wake up, you want to get the engine revving, you want to get out and hunt and kill stuff. So it naturally should be higher in the morning. And you'll see this green band being wider and a more robust level in the morning. And then it weans out during the day and should be kind of towards that lowest point in the evening where you go to sleep. With this person, cortisol levels were actually pretty good, a little bit of spike in that 3 to 5 range, but overall not horrible. What you'll see though is the counterpart with cortisol and keeps it checks and balances is DHEA. So I think of cortisol as like the gas pedal and DHEA is the brake pedal. So with this person, we see DHEA low. Remember, DHEA is also a precursor to testosterone. And this was a person that T levels in the 200s would get the testosterone shot. It would shoot up to nice ranges for a couple weeks, but after that, it was tanking down again. So if there's not enough building blocks to support those extra aspects of it, it's just going to be a losing battle and not feeling better. But let me go back to kind of this whole pathway where circumstance matters and context matters. So up here, we have cholesterol. And you see the arrow pointing to that. As it comes down the pathway, it has basically this choice. Do I need to use this resource as immediate survival? Then I'm going to shift over to the left, and you'll see all those little red arrows. And we call this the pregnenolone steal. Opposed to if we went due south, hitting DHEA and then producing testosterone. So the more stress, again, physical, chemical, emotional, social, genetic, medical, you name it, anything that's going to cause you to adapt quickly will shoot you over towards that cortisol, robbing you of the production of testosterone and regulation of those things and estrogen and ability to recover and repair. So circumstances are always key when assessing these kind of lab things. And the final C is the CATs. It's the catecholamines. And I feel like this is a much overlooked aspect to those symptoms that could mimic low T, but I would say a lot of times it's more upstream in the neurotransmitters. So what are catecholamines? Not all of these are neurotransmitters, but catecholamines are dopamine up top on the list and norepinephrine on the bottom, and epinephrine. Or if you're familiar, adrenaline, kind of that thing. Now, when you're looking at the function of these things, like I've been flying a ton lately, think of dopamine as the engine takeoff, like as the runway, you put the jets on, you get up in the air, you get going. So it's your car accelerator. GABA is the brakes. That's what's going to help you slow down. That's going to help you stop. Serotonin helps you enjoy the trip. Acetylcholine helps you remember the trip. And then norepinephrine, epinephrine, or adrenaline, that tells you where the exits are. So if there's an emergency, you know where to go out there. Now, if someone's in survival, you kind of want dopamine and norepinephrine to be really responsive. But here's an example of a test I've run called organic acids, where this top value, number 22, represents epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the second value, number 23, represents dopamine, where both of those are pretty low. They're on that low echelon. So where the cortisol, what I showed you before, same person, cortisol was fine, DHA was a little low, the actual energy output of the catecholamines can be one of those clues into why someone has a great life, but they're like, why do I feel crappy like this? An interesting point is there's another value on this test, number 28, and you'll see these opposite because they all have something in common called tyrosine, an amino acid. It's also the same building block of thyroid hormone. So I see that quite a bit with people with thyroid conditions, is that number 28 means we're burning through it. We're burning it up. We're destroying it. And so therefore we don't have enough to support what's going on with epinephrine and dopamine and their ability to regulate and get the engine going and find the exits. And so you'll see the same symptoms with this as you would low T. And it wouldn't be uncommon to see both of them at the same point, because this person had probably been on that side of protection multiple years, if not decades, just kind of small hits over and over and over again until they finally kind of hit a point of like, quote unquote, burnout. Now, so what do we do with all this? How do we start? How do we address this? And that's basically, it's got to be initiated by you. Like, your doctor is not going to go through this stuff with you. A, they don't have time. B, they just operate in a different paradigm that symptoms are stupid, where I operate in a paradigm of symptoms are smart. And you look at the same thing and one deduces stupid and one deduces smart, your actions after that are going to be a whole lot different. And so if this makes sense to you, if you're like, hey, I can relate to this, then the next step is having conversations, and especially with your doctor. Now, the hard thing to do to talk to your doctor is there's usually an ego involved. And I can say that because I've got an ego, but I've learned to hopefully, back it off enough to have open conversations with people. But if you feel like your doctor doesn't have that, if you want to start that conversation, I would say this is a great phrase to start with. So would you be open to? And that could be, would you be open to testing some of these things? Would you be open to looking deeper? Would you be open, whatever it is? And it's kind of a little psychology trick. Like, would you be open to, meaning, would you be open-minded? And of course, no one's going to be like, no, I'm closed-minded. Like, it's my way or the highway, or those types of things. So this kind of gets your foot in the door, so to speak, in that it can open up a conversation. And if it doesn't, if they're like, nope, I wouldn't be open to that, then go find a new doctor. Now, another kind of phrase to kind of play against their ego would be like, I'm not sure if you're the right person, but and then you kind of present your request with them. Of course, they're going to think they're the right person. They're a doctor. They think they've gone to school for so many years. They spent so much money in education. Like, they're the upper echelon of education in the country, but that ego's the enemy. So this is where you can use their ego against them to help you create and to get maybe some further testing and just further conversations with potentially looking at your issues at a deeper level. If both those backfire, well, then you got me. And so the only thing I'm going to sell to you guys today is a 15-minute discovery call, wherever you are in the world, wherever you're in the country, in that let's get on the phone together and just pick my brain a little bit. Like, we can order most of these tests from anywhere. They're kits that you do in home, like the adrenal one would be like the cortisol and DHA one is a saliva test. You do that from home. The catecholamine test is part of a larger test called organic acids. That's actually a urine sample that you collect, again, from the comfort of your own home. So the cool thing with modern medicine and modern labs is that it's becoming more accessible, and it's becoming, just easier to collect. No needles, no blood, just some other body fluids. But that's kind of what I have for you today. We're going to make this short. We're going to make this sweet. It's recorded, hopefully. I don't know, hopefully. And then there'll be some follow-up emails sending out your way. If you have specific questions, just reply to those emails, or even better, set up a 15-minute discovery call. And you can do that through my website, drkurt.place, or even call in the office, look up our office, Dr. Kurt's Place in Colorado Springs, and my assistant can get you set up with that. But thank you for your time today. Happy Friday, whether it's morning or afternoon where you are. Have a great weekend.